Hey, welcome to Saturday's Warrior. We've got a special guest with us today. We've got Big 12 Mafia from the Big 12 Mafia and the Holy Rival shows joining us. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for being here. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, so I'm sure if you've come across my channel, you've definitely already seen Big 12 Mafia. But if you haven't, they on the Holy Rival show and his content does a lot of Big 12, BYU, and really just all college football. They've been all over college football realignment, which is why I wanted you to come on today to kind of look at and suss out the situation facing the remaining Pac-2 schools in Oregon State and Washington State, and what their future looks like. What are the potential scenarios that they could do? Because really, a few months ago or a year ago, when everyone's talking about the Pac-12 exploding, imploding, the conversation was, oh well, they'll just go to the Mountain West. But now it looks like it's more nuanced than that,
Yeah.
and they might have other options. So, what can they do to kind of put, because we've never seen anything like this before? What can they do to really shore up their situation going forward?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to help out whenever I can. So yeah, it is more nuanced, right? Last fall, all the talk was, what are they going to do with the premium brands that are in the Pac-12? I would say Utah, Oregon, Washington, not Cal, Stanford, Arizona and Arizona State were talked about. Colorado, nobody cared about. So they were just sort of in that also ran category. Everybody said eventually they'll just have to be relegated, and that's just survival of the fittest. It's what happens. But it isn't that easy. For one thing, there's still the disposition of all the Pac-12 now Pac-2 assets, right? You and I make a deal. I'm gonna sell you my car. I sign over the title to you. That doesn't give you right later to come back to me, or I can't go to you later and say, hey, sorry, I want the car back, or I want at least some of the money. If you turn around and sell it, I want some of those proceeds. That's not how it works. But because the law is the law, they're going to have to really get it through to either go through the court system, which will take years, and we'll have all the depositions, we'll have all the discovery on the documents. Nobody wants that. Nobody at the Pac-12 wants any of their hidden communications shown, to see how incompetent they were over the last 2 years. Even after Oklahoma and Texas said they were leaving, they weren't proactive. They weren't really reactive to get out there and do stuff. Instead, they waited and they waited. And in doing so, they buried their conference when USC decided to leave. So now they want to be gone, but they want access to the stuff that's still in the Pac-12, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars. It's hundreds of millions of dollars in NCAA basketball credits. It's also the remainder of the media deal. And then the biggest one is the college football playoff money, which goes to the Power Five conferences, now Power Four. And they're trying to basically say on their way out, we want to take some of that money with us. You and I both know it's ridiculous, right? They've left. They're on to greater pastures. So honestly, from a right perspective, from what most people would consider themselves a fair perspective, Oregon State, Washington State should be able to do whatever they want with that money. Uh, but of course, that's not how it works, and they don't have a lot of power within the overall scheme of things. So, except for Kurt Schultz being the president of Washington State and having a vote on the college football playoff committee, they have no power. They're out in the cold, as it were. So, what I have been advocating for, what you have been advocating for, what people who really see a sense of justice out in the world, that we want those two schools to land in a Power Five conference. There's no reason. They didn't do anything wrong to get relegated. They didn't go out and wreck college football as we know it to not deserve to have that time on television. So why don't they go to a bigger conference? Well, they could go to the Big 12, and they could use the assets of the Pac 12 to use to buy their way in essentially and be part of that conference. And the other schools don't want that to happen. So it's going to either have to be litigated or more than likely it'll be settled. So you don't get any of those cobwebs or things in the dark recesses of communications that the Pac-12 has done over the last 24 months, and it should be settled. So the only question is Washington State and Oregon State going to get a shot to be in the Big 12 or another conference?
Yeah, it's crazy because you look at like some of these schools that, especially the Big Ten, that really have just completely mismanaged their programs. Now they have programs that really, it's debatable whether they deserve to be in a P5, but because of geography or because of history,
Right.
they, it seems like at least for now they're untouchable. And whereas, quality programs in Washington State and Oregon State both having great seasons too of, perfect timing, right?
Right.
And that they're in this situation. So it really is a bummer. And from what it sounds like right now, that the Big 12 just, I mean, they could have taken them already. So it sounds like they're not. That I think that's an interesting idea you mentioned of potentially using the assets to buy their way in. Are you thinking like they would just kind of merge those into the Big 12, or they'd say, hey, we're just going to live off of this money and we can come join. You don't have to pull out of your pool to fund us, or how do you imagine something like that looking?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite possible you could have some deal where they come in. They're not gonna be taken advantage of like Stanford and Cal and heavens to everybody knows nobody's gonna be come in like an SMU. So yeah, I would imagine either they would forego media money for a little while using the assets that they would have won or had settled out of the Pac-2, or they come in at a reduced amount. They don't completely forego all of the income, but they also would turn over assets like the Pac-12 network. Now, Bob Thompson said that there's a little bit of a twist to the Pac-12 network resources, and that is that each individual contract was done on a regional basis. So it's done with each individual school. So just getting the Pac-12 network resources by itself isn't necessarily worth a ton of money. What's more worth money is the actual infrastructure, like a BYU network. And we know how many tens of millions of dollars BYU put into their state of the art communications and all of their infrastructure around what they have supported for their sports. It's the same type of deal. They could essentially fold those in, maybe take the resources and share those out to the rest of the Big 12 so that they maybe have newer TV equipment, or I don't know. There you can get real imaginative, but it's not as simple as saying they would just come in and bring all the media rights with them, because they wouldn't. At that point, the conference would be defunct, and so any liabilities and contracts that are currently out there would no longer, they'd be null and void. So it would be great if they could just say, yes, here's a turnkey car. You guys can just start using it, and we'll sign the lease over to you, and it's your car. It doesn't work that way. It's a little more nuanced when it comes to the communication deal. But yeah, there's lots of flexibility that would make it so they would appeal a little bit bigger. The biggest challenge to them coming to the Big 12 at this point, I don't think it has anything to do with ESPN or Fox funding it. I think it has all to do with the voting blocks in the Big 12. And you would go from 4 old Pac-12 to 6 old Pac-12 schools that you could make an argument might be aligned. I would argue the Washington State and Oregon State would want nothing to do with the other 4 Pac-12 schools that went to the conference. They would want to be immediately in bed with the Big 12 because they would have shown them the loyalty to bring them in. So you could play that down the road, but yeah, there are some cards to be played still.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting dynamic, and when looking at it, because it's hard to know exactly how much of that. I mean, you think of the power structure has shifted in that conference completely, because a lot of the USC or Oregon or even Washington may have been throwing around a lot of weight um, in a lot of these decisions that
Right.
perhaps these other schools would be more open to the line of thinking of the the existing Big 12 schools. So it's hard to say, but yeah, I understand the hesitancy there. And one thing I looked at too is that they're still trying to figure out the Pac-2 schools that is are still looking at weighing the how much all these assets, because from what I've read, it's a lot there, but that there's still a lot of liability as well. When you look at the Comcast,
Right.
all this stuff, and so they're still trying to figure out which one is going to be greater, because that's obviously going to impact what they want to do going forward. If there's if they're in the hole, then there's no sense in really trying to hold on to that.
Right, and I guess it would be a trade-off. You would have to say, "We're gonna give you access to our broadcast rights," meaning that the Big 12 would now be big what? It would be 18 at that point, and so it gives more inventory to sell to broadcasters, and depending on what you were willing to give them back on maybe on a 2 or a 4-year buy-in basis, they would have a reduced share. They obviously would bring value by itself. But just having that is a concern. And think about the Big 12. You've got what now? 3 schools that are isolated back east, just like BYU would have been until these 4 new schools are coming in from Pac-12. West Virginia's suffered out there for 12 years. And they came in at a reduced share originally, and they have done the most traveling up to this point. And now BYU and West Virginia and UCF and Cincinnati are carrying some of that burden. But once the 4 Pac-12 schools are moved in, and now it's a Big 16, that is more schools that can regionalize their travel. Not having teams from the East Coast to add, sort of balance it out, is going to be a problem. But you and I both know that the ACC is just a ticking time bomb. And once that happens, I think the Big 12 has other opportunities back east.
Yeah. So how much do you think that plays into the Big 12 being reluctant to bring these two schools in right now? Are they trying to save slots for potential ACC add-ons, or are they thinking if the ACC blows up and a bunch of schools go to numbers no longer an issue? I mean, the Big 10 could go as
Right.
big as, who knows how big they'd go. So, do you think that really matters, or and plays into the calculus there?
I think they're holding out hope that it does. Primarily the West Virginia people. They have waited and waited and waited. They had hoped to get ACC schools years ago. That didn't happen. And there's still a little bit of a concern for them that they feel like they're sort of being screwed because all the advancement has been west. Now there's nothing anybody could have done about that. The ACC's locked into 2036, some very domineering gore and media value that it really hamstrings any school from leaving that conference without, some major stones to be turned. So at the end of the day, the only opportunity was at the Pac-12 because it was blowing up and disintegrating. In my opinion, I think they should be pragmatic. I've been saying this since I started my shows in June or in May, that I really feel that they should bring in Oregon State and Washington State. They should bring in that inventory. It will strengthen the conference, and in a lot of ways, it will insulate it in case some schools do leave to the SEC or the Big Ten later. Who knows who those schools may be? And
Kyle
it would.
Whittingham knows.
So I'm sorry.
I said Kyle Whittingham knows.
Yeah, well,
I'm
we
just
all
kidding.
know how that he's obviously had people in his ear for months and months and months, maybe a year, telling him, "Don't worry about it, your turn will come." But I don't know if that's the case, especially if the ACC does blow up. Right now, they're sitting at 18, and the ACC has at least 2, if not 4 schools that are ready to jump to the Big Ten if the gore for the ACC blows up. So there are schools they're looking east right now. They really look like Florida. Certainly, anything in the southeast gives the Big Ten that sort of benchmark into that market, and that's heavy recruiting grounds. The schools that you worry about, though, is the ones that are continuing to be pushed down. The Indianas, the Purdue's, the Illinois. They're at this point, they're just along for the ride. They can't go out and get any money that's worth anything on their own. So they're going to do whatever the big boys tell them. And that would mean that the expansion would more than likely come from the East. And then who knows what happens with the West. Stanford has been rumored for a long time to go with Notre Dame if Notre Dame ever went to the Big Ten. And, that's it. It's fascinating the way this has worked out. Nobody thought the Pac-12 would blow up. Nobody thought it would. Even Bob Thompson has come out and said, yeah, I still didn't think it was going to happen. He thought they would sign a deal. It wouldn't be the best deal in the world, but he thought it would be somewhere where the Big 12 is at. And now his paradigm, he's had to adjust, right? You've had Colorado completely blow up the sports media marketplace with their, 10 million people watching a game. Those numbers are just beyond just insanity for college football.
Yeah, it really is. What I find fascinating, you talked about it, they all thought they were going to get the deal, but when it comes to the Pac-12 mismanaging their situation, it shows you how not forward thinking they were. Not in the terms of, yeah, they mismanaged the TV deal, and maybe they should have taken what they had when it came along.
Right.
That's one thing. But okay, they're in this situation in the spring, early summer, and they're looking at, okay, here's the reality where we're at, and yet they still did not see, okay, so what happens? We don't think anyone's leaving, but what happens if one school leaves? What happens if Colorado does leave? And they could not even think that far ahead, because it was amazing, because before the Colorado announcement, everyone was like, no big deal, let them go, whatever. The second Colorado said they were leaving, it was pandemonium. Everyone's like, what's going to happen? It was such a different conversation. And it was one that we were all talking about. And yet it felt like they had no foresight into, okay, if they leave, how does this unstable us? And they didn't think, well, maybe we should go ahead and add San Diego State now, just in case. We think we'll want them down the road. Why not add them now? Or whatever, like taking some sort of precautionary measures. And
Right.
they just showed, okay, USC, UCLA, that was tough. Okay, the TV deal, you let that get away. But then to continually fail to take measures to protect themselves, it's really hard to feel bad for them, really.
Which is why you can understand the ACC did what it did by bringing in Stanford, Cal, and even the check writing SMU, because they're looking forward, and they know that North Carolina, Florida State, and Clemson are really unhappy, but they're not the only three. Miami is not very happy where everything is. Virginia is a prestige program back east. No matter how good their basket or their football brand is, they are a prestige university in the United States, and they're going to find a home. Virginia Tech potentially. Who knows what happens with Pitt? So that's why they brought those schools in. But between you and me, it's not going to make a difference, because the media valuation, how much do you think it changes once Florida State, North Carolina, and Clemson leave? Might not be this year, might not even be next year. But if it happens even in the next 5 years, it still is going to affect the media valuation for the conference. And if you're sitting there and you're Virginia Tech, you don't get an invite to the Big Ten, but the Big 12 sitting there and saying, not only will we bring you in, but you'll come in at a greater share than you would start at any of those other conferences. And you're going to have that prestige access to both Fox, ESPN, and who knows, maybe it's YouTube, or, it's Amazon at some point. And their value is going to go up. The value for the Big 12 went up 1%. That number came out last week, 1% in total value after Texas and Oklahoma left. Now, you took 4 schools to replace 2 to get there, but it did go up in value. Knowing that, the value proposition for the Big 12 is just going to continue to go up when you add now Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah. And even if Utah does get the magic ticket to go to the Big Ten, it's not going to be in the next couple of years. It'll probably be in 5-6 years at the next media contract negotiations in 2030, 31. And when that happens, at that point, the Big 12 would have already renegotiated their deal at a higher amount than the ACC is still going to be stuck at. So I just don't see that it's tenable for that conference.
No, I agree with everything you said. I see why they did it, bringing in Stanford and Cal, SMU. I don't like it. I don't, like all this that's happening to college football, but it's the reality. I understand why they did it. Ultimately, I'm not sure if it'll work the way they want it to. It'll be interesting to see what happens when it doesn't. But you're right. If it doesn't, I mean, a lot of these schools are going to have a lot of options between
Right.
Big Ten and SEC, and that's why another thing when we talk about Utah, I don't think Utah isn't a potential candidate. I
Mhm.
just think when you look at a power rankings, and I even talked about this in a video of potential fits to go to the Big Ten, they've got to be down there on the list. Like there's so many other priorities, and they've shown that the Big Ten by bringing in Oregon over Stanford, that at this point it's about brand. When they brought in Maryland and Rutgers, it was about markets to
Right.
build the Big Ten network. And now it's really about brands. And so potentially a Clemson, who you wouldn't normally associate with the Big Ten, becomes a
Right.
possibility, or even Miami, which is branded now AAU, or whatever. So the options are there. But yeah, it's the ACC is in a tough spot, and I applaud them for not standing pat. You
Mhm.
look at the Pac-12 stood pat. The Big 12 stood pat initially in 2016 and decided not to expand. And then, they were in danger for a little while, managed to pull out of it. But so I applaud them for at least taking, measures to try to shore up their conference. But yeah, it's wild out there. And so many different possibilities of what will happen next. But going back to Washington State and Oregon State, looking at their options. So, we mentioned the Mountain West. If the Big 12 doesn't work out, and that's becomes not an option, at least not in the short term.
Right.
What is the chance of them? I know they've said it's a last resort to really stay, as just a Pac-2 and kind of essentially running independent schedules for a couple years. But if the assets are enough, I could see a lot of value in that, and it would be difficult. But with all these merging conferences, there's going to be a lot of schools that need to fill last minute out of conference schedules, and so I feel like they're. And then you always have the Mountain West to do some sort of scheduling alliance with them. But
Right.
if they do merge, whether it's they just join the Mountain West or they reverse merge is what I've heard it referred to as, or relegation. Like what does that mean for them going forward? Do you think that they're kind of out of the picture at that point, or are they still going to be able to as realignment continues, find their way back into a quote unquote power conference?
A couple different options, and the first one obviously is to delay, not make a decision for 2024, but to buy a little bit of time to kind of see if there's anything they can do to get in to the Big 12. And I'm talking playing the long game, going to them and saying, what would it take? We're offering you a blank check. What would it take to have you bring us in? And see what they would be open to. If the Big 12 says, sorry, absolutely not. We don't want you to sit around and be the one guy that's at the dance that doesn't get to dance with somebody just because you held out and you were the last one. I think they need to have and I think Brett Yormark would do this. I think Brett Yormark seems pretty straight up, and he would tell them how you're in a tough spot right today. I don't think we can do anything, but in my opinion, take a year and do that. Just do an independent schedule, maybe even only schedule 10 games. There's no rule that says you have to have 12 full games. And just try to do an alliance on scheduling for 1 year and see where you could end up. Because if they can buy a year, then the next year, look at all the schools that you could stay as A4 plus one, and that would be just the schools off the top of my head. So you have Washington State, Oregon State, Tulane, Memphis. You have Air Force, Colorado State. They're probably interchangeable. Boise State, which is a brand, San Diego State, and then there's several like UTSA, fantastic program that's up and coming. And then you could look really far east and USF. That's going to be a program. They're going to be the fifth best in the state of Florida, and the state of Florida is the number one recruiting ground in college football. You're seeing UCF is reaping a lot of those benefits by joining the Big 12. So they could put together a league that probably wouldn't be an A4. In fact, I'm positive it wouldn't be, but it would be good enough that they would be able to take the best of the AAC and take the best of the Mountain West and build a 8 to 10 league, a school league, and they would be respectable brands. And then look, all you need is access. In the new college football playoff negotiation, which is happening now, they could go, and as long as they keep that one slot open, they could do a best of the rest on that league and pretty much own that spot every year. Washington State and Oregon State could almost go to the college football playoff every year if they can negotiate at least one spot to get access to. Because I can't think of anybody back east that would just run roughshod over a league that has Tulane, Washington State, Oregon State, and Boise State. Just those four brands. San Diego State's down this year, but they've had a good program. Colorado State is one that they're another demographic area that they could be good if they have bigger backing. So that's what I would say. First, I hold out even to wait a year to sort of wait for the dust to settle out of all realignment, and then get those Mountain West schools out of their contract where they have to pay, what is it, $17 million a year. After a certain date, it's up to 34 again. If they can get them before they have to declare that next time, they could build a league with that.
Yeah, I think I understand them being hesitant to just stay the two of them and essentially run independent schedules. But like you said, if they can buy themselves some time, if it comes out that the assets are enough,
Right.
with when they come out with where they are financially, then I think that could make a lot of sense splitting between the two. And they could potentially be raking in way more than they would joining a conference, even a Power 5, for those couple years. And if
Right.
they're not able to, then they can, it gives them time, like you said, to allow those schools leaving their conferences to give that year notice, whatever, so
Exactly.
they can get out of it and join. But it gives you 2 years. It's not easy being independent, but it is possible. And there's other schools, UConn's and UMass and whatever, that, you throw in a FCS in there, whatever, to kind of fill that out. And if those assets are enough, you might have enough to throw a little extra money at these schools that may not, to encourage them to play you, maybe later in the season to, fill out the back end of that schedule. And
sorry, you cut out there a little bit. I think my internet might be wigging out or something. But in fact, can you restate the question just so I make sure I know what you're asking?
Yeah, no. So just in terms of play, if they are able to reload the conference, do you think that they'll be able to, the playoff committee at a 6+6 model, or do you think it's in that I'll move to a 5+?
I think by 2026 it's 5x7. Yeah. The biggest reason is because the Big Four are not going to want to share the revenue with another just throw-in conference.
Right. So that's tough. Like you were saying, I still think it might be the most dominant, the G5 conference, non A5, A4 at that point. Which,
yeah.
Could you quickly, actually, for anybody that's not familiar with the A5 and what that means?
Sure. So A or AQ is auto qualifying leagues, and right now that's currently named as the Power 5, and that it had included the Pac-12, but now the Pac-12 is going away. So it's the 4 autonomous qualifier leagues that their conference champions all get access to the playoff, and they share a disproportionate amount of the money that is negotiated just for the playoff every year go to those 4 conferences. And then the balance goes to the G5 leagues to all be settled out and shared. It's not at all equal. You're talking on a $2 billion contract. They get I can't remember what the number is, but it's something like 33% or something of the total amount, which is much less than you're going to get in the other leagues. So it's a big deal, and it's only going to get more money as they negotiate for 2026. Where who knows what that is for 4-6 or 4-8, or they could go to 16 teams, and that just adds more access for the top leagues.
Yeah, and I think that highlights things exactly why they would still be so eager to get into a power conference and in another one of the A4 conferences to maintain that status, because the money and the position and everything is really structured around that. It goes to show why it's so important for them. Even a reloaded Pac conference would not be treated the same as them being in one of the other A4 conferences.
No,
So it
no,
shows why that urgency there, even if, they're like, oh, well, we got a Rose Bowl tie-in. We've got, because all that's changing anyway. It's great for the, immediate future, but long-term, it would not be tenable, or at least it would
no.
not be comparable to the internet issues. But yeah, thanks for sort of hopping on, and it's wild time. Everyone I know is we're in the football season. This would all have by now, but it's still going on. So I think everyone's waiting to see what does happen with it. But Bomber, tell everyone where we find you and how they can
Sure.
follow you.
Yeah, so underneath my picture right there, you'll see my two handles on both YouTube and on Twitter. On YouTube, the channel is called Big 12 Mafia. On Twitter, it's the same thing. The Holy Rivals is the BYU Utah Holy War channel that me and Wild Ute have. And yeah, both are, going. We've been going since May and seem to be doing okay.
It's great stuff. I'll conclude in the comments. So definitely go check them out. Follow them. They cover all the stuff, all the so if you're interested in alignment, and also don't forget to like our video and subscribe here as well. And thank you so much for hopping on, and we'll be sure to check you out.
I'm glad to do it anytime. Just ask. If I have time, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, thanks. Take
Okay.
care.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.